welcome to LA with, as I'm sure you can see, absolutely beautiful views. In today's video, I want to take a deep look into the concept of self-love. But before we start talking about self-love, let's take a couple of steps back and let's focus on what self-acceptance and self-esteem mean in the concept of loving yourself. Self-acceptance can be defined as the act and state of understanding and recognizing one's own inabilities and own limitations. Self-esteem is a confidence and satisfaction in oneself, linking in really heavily with self-respect. So you're thinking to yourself, why is self-love so important? And I think if you were to trawl through social media now, you probably would see the very worst side of self-love. You'd see influencers talking about self-love in terms of the car that they drive. You'd see guys into weightlifting defining self-love in terms of how good their body looks. Nah. For me, that is absolutely nothing to do with self-love. Main reason being, self-love is absolutely unconditional. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take a step back and I'm going to tell you a personal story of my own. This is all completely unscripted, completely ad hoc, no preparation has gone into this whatsoever, but I think it is an absolutely perfect story to illustrate what self-love does. So let's flash back. I'm 30 years old now. Back when I was 19, 20, 21, I had a really bad relationship with myself and a really bad relationship with my own appearance. I won't bore you with talking about where that stemmed from because for the concept of this video, I really don't think this is relevant. As I got a little bit older, I always used to think to myself, perhaps it will get a little bit better. Perhaps I'll start to feel better in myself. Perhaps everything that I thought mattered won't actually matter in the same way that it does. I get to the age of 27 and I realise absolutely nothing has changed. I'm looking back over the last 5 years and they haven't been the best, to be brutally honest with you. They've not been the best at all. I've been anorexic at points, I've been bulimic at points, I've had an endless cycle of comparison, I've had phases where I've been hugely introverted, where I've not wanted to leave the house because I've not liked the way that I've looked, or because I've had some perceived insecurity hanging over me. Basically, looking back, I was not living life at full potential or to fulfillment. And for me, fulfillment really is the purpose of life. So let's take a step back to just before Christmas. And I have probably the biggest breakthrough that I've probably ever had when it comes to the relationship with myself. And it's interesting because resolving my relationship with myself actually means resolving my relationship with my dad. And you're thinking, why does your relationship with your dad actually link in any way with the way that you perceive yourself? I can honestly tell you, it makes a massive difference. When I was growing up, I used to look at my dad, who was a very introverted man, a very caring man, but just not a man that offered a great deal of masculine presence. And I used to spend my time thinking to myself, why is he like that? Why is he the way that he is? And I used to sometimes think, I'd look at my mum and I'd think, why is she with him? What does she see in the man? And I was just internalising all these thoughts towards my dad. I'd always say the same thing to people. I'd always say, I love the man, but we are just so completely different. And I think as I grew up, I began to internalise so much of that, and I really began to make such a huge meaning as to what that meant. And the meaning that I was really taking was that you have to be this perfect definition of masculinity just because your dad is not that. And the only way people will ever love you, or the only way women will ever look at you, will be if you are that definition of masculinity, and if you are everything that your dad is not. But I realise now when I look back at that, that is naive, that is wrong, and that is a completely false way to live your life. And the reason I got to that, and the reason I reached this conclusion, was I attended the Landmark Forum back in January. We're doing an exercise, and the purpose of that exercise is really reflecting on, I suppose, fear, and reflecting on what else is going on in the world. And I'm having an okay day. I'm not thinking too much about it. Everything's kind of progressing and going relatively well. And we're doing an exercise where we're sitting, and the presenter is basically saying, imagine what it's like for this person to be scared of you. Imagine what it's like for that person to be scared of you. Then he drops the bombshell. He says, imagine that your own father's scared of you. Something suddenly twigs in my head. I realise my dad is scared of me. And then I go home and I'm just looking at him and I'm just thinking, why have I made him into this villain that he never should have been? Go to the forum the next day and there's a lot of talk about closing the past. And something suddenly goes in my head. I think to myself, if I can accept my dad then maybe I can accept myself more. Next thing you know, I'm sitting there and I feel completely and utterly overwhelmed with love for my dad. And I just get this burning urge to tell him that I love him. I go home that evening, I see him, and I say, for the first time since I was 3 years old, I say the words, "Dad, I love you." He looks a little bit emotional, and he just utters 2 words. He says, "Thank you." No hug, nothing else. But I can look at him and I can see that me saying those words has made him feel so much better in himself. I wake up the next day and something has completely and utterly changed in my head. I feel 10 times more positive about myself than I ever have done before. And I see my dad that morning and I just look at him and I think, Jesus Christ, I love that man so fucking much. And ever since then, there's just been a light that's just gone in my head. And everything just feels so much better. I feel so much lighter. I feel overwhelmed with love when I think of certain people. And my whole experience and my whole reflections on everything now is just completely different. And for the first time, I think I've reached a point where I'm actually have both self-acceptance, self-esteem and self-love. And you throw that together and that's just a powerful combination for living your life in a much more fulfilling and rewarding way. So if you're watching this video, I would encourage you to really look back, think of the people in your life, think about what's happened in your life and really just close off the negative chapters in your past, because I can tell you from personal experience, doing so gives you a completely new lease of life, and one that I definitely would encourage everybody to have, and one that will allow anybody watching this video to live life at their full potential. Thank you very much for watching the video. If you liked it, could I ask you just to give it a like down below? If you really liked it, then could I ask you to give the channel a subscribe? But in the meantime, thank you very much for watching this video.